All right.
Good evening, everyone. Can you please join me in silent meditation? Can you sit erect in your chair with your feet flat on the floor and your shoulders relaxed, please? Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Dat. Namo Dat. Could everybody please join me in chanting the Junirai? We'll do it a little bit faster today. Kenshu Tennin Shokugyo Amida Senjo Zokuson Zai Mimyu Anako Muryo Bushi Shuinyu 金色心情如線のシャマタ行如像部両目上脈小蓮華甲賀将来未来尊面前炎上如満月以降有如千日月小如天空くしら甲賀将来未来尊观音頂戴观中寿修寿妙相法所言のぶくげどまきょまんこが将来みだそん無病無苦故障上習得強血尿国小佐利悪徳自在甲賀将来未来尊十方妙門菩薩衆無料小魔上三段一生修上願力中甲賀将来未来尊根体保険陳所形 前言少女明大座、おひざ上女戦の、子が将来未来尊、実法将来勝負し、権限人図深夜な、戦後草原上業、子が将来未来尊、小無常無我と、薬尿水月伝尿路、一種説法無明人、子が将来未来尊、一尊仏説無悪名、薬無如に悪道夫、主任死心教非尊、子が将来未来尊、一尊無料法勉強、無少種悪知識、往生不退死菩提、子が将来未来尊、画説非尊苦毒寺、修善無変、尿海水、小逆前言、小乗車、エセ種、上小いと、なまなむ、なまなむ、なまなむ、なまなむ、なまなむ、なまなむ。願にしくどく、平等正祭、道本菩提心、往生Namadats, namadats, 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 namadats. Good evening, everyone. Nice to see all of you. I hope that you're having beautiful spring weather like we are here on the East Coast. It got to the mid 60s today. And actually, when I was chanting and looking out, I can see the setting sun over the Hudson River. It's absolutely beautiful today. Safi, my cat, was actually sitting in the window looking out on the beautiful ground below. For those that haven't been to the New York Buddhist Church, I hope you do come visit at some time because we're actually across the street from a park. So there's nothing obstructing our view from the church. It goes down one level and it goes a park all the way to the Hudson River.
So as I said before, in the wintertime, that wind will come right off the lake, but in the summertime, it's gorgeous. Get to hear the kids play in the playground underneath. It's a very refreshing place to live. So I hope you can come visit sometime. So when I was working on the talk, I'm going to apologize to Eric because he made a wonderful suggestion last week about gratitude versus prayer. And I bit off a little more than I can chew, Eric. So thank you. One of the reasons I'm not doing it tonight is that for the Eastern Buddhist League Conference, we're going to be talking about the subject of gratitude. So I wanted to do a little bit more research on that before I present it to all of you. So thank you for the suggestion. What I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to talk a little bit about Renyo Shonin, who was the eighth master of our denomination. When I say eighth master, it means basically the eighth abbot or the head spiritual leader. And what I like to do is more importantly talk about his teachings. I'm very fortunate. We all are very fortunate. When I was going to the Seattle Temple all those years ago, Reverend Castro said, "You're so lucky. You've got things in English." When Reverend Castro was going through in Japan, there was hardly anything in English. And one of the great works that came out was actually a work on Renyo, which is done by Mimi Rogers and Ann Rogers. This is an incredible book. It goes over the background and the historical content of Renyo Shonin, but it also goes through his letters, breaks them down and analyzes them. I can see Michael's eyes getting really big with all those wonderful footnotes right there, right, Michael? But one of the things, again, coming to a Jodo Shinshu temple, whether it's at Ekoji or New York or wherever we are, is walking into the doors and there's this rich historical culture that we have with the Buddhist teachings that have been passed down from us to us from centuries ago. I never take it for granted when I walk into a Jodo Shinshu temple in America. What are the causes and conditions that here we are in 2024 that we have over 40 of these temples across the United States, that we have a chance to hear the teachings of the Buddha, and specifically about Shinran Shonin and today Renyo Shonin. It's pretty amazing. And then if you go to the temples, we do have the portraits of Shinran and Renyo in the Onaijin or the altar area. And as I've mentioned to you before, when I first started attending, I thought it was a little odd that you had these Japanese historical people in the altar. But as I learned and studied the teachings both of Shinran and Renyo, I learned to appreciate the reason that they're there. And I can honestly say that we talk a lot about Shinran starting what we now call Jodo Shinshu. But one of the realistic dimensions about Renyo is that we probably would not be here. There probably would not be a BCA if there was not for Renyo. And I don't need to go into his history per se because it's very accessible online. But basically, he lived from 1415 to 1899, and he was the eighth master of our tradition. To reiterate, a lot of people say, really, is this true? But the head abbot or the gomonshu is what they're called in Japanese, is a direct disciple, or excuse me, descendant of Shinran Shonin. So that means that Renyo was his eighth generation removed from Shinran. And so on paper, when I saw that, it's like, oh, this is interesting. So the current gomonshu, I believe, is the 26th generation. I was ordained by the 25th. And I'm sure that Eric had a very similar experience that when you go through ordination, the idea that it wasn't until I actually had the symbolic razor placed upon my head for the three treasures by the Gomonchu that I thought, this is a direct descendant of Shinran. It was very moving and very touching. Um, and the whole point is that the Honganji means the temple of the vow. And so the whole point of the Honganji is to protect the vow, which is the 18th vow, the most significant vow, to protect the teachings of Jodo Shinshu all of these centuries. And then with the pleasure of it coming over the oceans 125 years ago, as we know, it's our celebration of 125 years this year. And so I treasure that. And so even within my lifetime, now that these works are translated into English, it really opens it up for us the ability to understand the teachings at a more deep level, more subtle level. Now, when I mentioned before that, we probably would not be here, there would be no Buddhist churches of America, that sounds like a grand statement. But one of the things that happens is that when Jodo Shinshu, for the first 2 or 3 centuries in Japan, there were no Jodo Shinshu ministers. At that period in history, the Japanese government controlled what we call in English the ordination platform. So the Japanese imperial government controlled how many ministers, how many monks or nuns were ordained. Very controlling. Actually, in the Nara period, which is before Shinran Shonin, they actually paid a stipend to the monks. That's how much control the Japanese government had over the cleric. So as time went on, so those first few centuries, our temples were Tendaishu, meaning that the school that Shinran came from. Because in Pure Land Buddhism, there are rituals that are in Tendai, the Shishirai and some other beautiful chants and some rituals they would practice in Tendai, and that's what they were doing at these new Jodo Shinshu temples. It wasn't until Renyo came that he made the decision that we need to create our own version, so to speak, of our service. So instead of chanting, Tendai chants, which for those that are interested, that when you go to seminary, unfortunately, we don't chant a lot that we were taught. There's some beautiful sutras that we were taught to chant for people that have kyoshi or kai kyoshi that unfortunately we don't use on a daily basis, but we still have that tradition. And so the idea was that it was Renyo who took Shinran's poem, the Shoshinge, which we're very familiar with in its chanting form now, but it was originally written as a poem, and he was the one that made the decision that we should put it into a chant, walking away from these more Tendai-centric type practices. Also, he's the one that decided that the standardization of how many Chinese characters or kanji are in Namo Amida Butsu, confirming about what kind of doctrine there is, what would be in the altar. You've heard myself and Eric many times say that the most desirable thing to have in the altar is the Myogo or Namo Amida Butsu, because when people look at it, they don't personify it and think of it as a person. Second best is the scroll, and the least desirable is the statue, which we all have. But I know that we all appreciate the art and the idea of the symbolism of the Buddha in a statue form. So it's Renyo that created these formats. And so even though in America, as I've mentioned in previous classes, that the Japanese-American internment during World War II, where the Japanese Americans consciously tried to make Jodo Shinshu Buddhism less exotic, calling it the Buddhist Churches of America, sitting in pews and doing these practices that make it look more of a Protestant service. But still, the core essence goes back to Renyo. So again, one of the things about coming to New York, one of the things, I was at Seabrook this weekend. So it's really fun to go to the different temples that I supervise because they're so different. So Seabrook is literally in the countryside, very laid back, a really down to earth feeling to it. Ekoji is Washington, D.C. And so we've got that type of feeling with that. And then you've got New York. And here in New York, for some reason, the traditions are more traditional. And that could be from the Japanese ministers that served here before. So if you've ever witnessed one of our services on a Sunday, we do a lot more ritual than we would do at a Koji or a typical BCA temple. And part of this ritual that we do here is we do the Kobunsho. Now, the Kobunsho means the letters of Renyo Shonin. And this shows you how Renyo wanted to try to spread the teachings of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism in a different way than had been done previously. What he did is that, again, at this point in history, when he was serving as the 8th master, there were not so many temples. There were a lot of what we call dojos. You're familiar with the term dojo for like karate and judo. Well, this would be a place where people would gather. Maybe there wasn't an ordained person and they would get somebody that was literate that would try to lead the discussion like a Howakai. And so then people would write letters to Renyo asking about Buddhist ideas or what his feelings were about different tasks or our lifestyle. And so he would write these letters in colloquial Japanese of the time, and he would send them to these dojos, and the people would read them. And so that became more formalized to the point where actually when you go to Japan and you receive Tokudo and Kyoshi ordination, you learn the ritual of holding the book and you come out. There's a very strong ritual where and then you chant it in this very elaborate style, which I'm not going to do to you tonight because I don't have the voice for it, but it's a very melodic, not a chant. It's like a saying. And so these are the letters. So many of us are familiar with the white ashes, which is traditionally read at a memorial service or a funeral, which was originally written to someone that lost a child, a teenage child, and was mourning and asked Shinran what he thought. Now, these letters are so important that they've been read in Japan every day for the last 500 years, and many Jodo Shinshu temples in America, they're still read every day. And I'd like to go over one of them tonight because sometimes when I present Jodo Shinshu to interfaith groups or to students, people sometimes think that maybe we have a modern interpretation, a deconstructed version of Jodo Shinshu that we are trying to promote. And this example of the letter that I'm going to read tonight from Renyo Shonin shows the different type of perspective that he came from. So when I read this letter, I'm going to go through it and we'll talk about different components of it. But when we think about Buddhists that, you go to the Zen monastery, you try to reach enlightenment, you go through Zazen meditation for years, staring at, the wall or doing the koans, you're doing all these different things to try to purify yourself. Well, this letter from Renyo is going to be a great contrast to that. Again, most Shin followers are householders that they would be able to utilize the Dharma in their everyday life. They would not have to give up their worldly life. And that's what this letter addresses directly. So this letter in English is titled On Becoming a Priest in the Aspiration for Buddhahood. Okay. So as the fundamental principle of Master Shinran in our tradition is that one should become, is not that one should become a priest in the aspiration for Buddhahood, or that one should renounce family and separate oneself from worldly attachments. So, okay, right off the bat, he is saying, going against what most people would consider basic Buddhist doctrine, is that giving up your worldly life so you can order to study and become a Buddha. He's saying you do not need to do that. It is simply when the awakening of the one thought moment of taking refuge in Amida, other power faith is decisively settled, with no distinction at all between male and female, young and old. Now, this is very contemporary sounding. So here, in this letter, let's see, when was this letter signed? In 1471 in Japan, you have a Buddhist monk that is saying that it is no difference between male and female, young and old, completely taking the teachings in a different direction, making it much more human, much more for us everyday householders. The larger sutra describes the state of having attained this faith, Shinjin, as immediately attaining birth in the Pure Land and dwelling in a state of non-retrogression. Okay, Ken, there's your quote for today for about whether we receive, go to the Pure Land or non-retrogression. Tanlon, who was one of the Chinese Pure Land masters, says in a commentary, with the awakening of one thought of entrusting, we enter the company of those whose birth is truly settled. As we were talking about with the new pledge, the concept of, my glasses are really reflective here, of talking about the idea of a bodhisattva perspective where we are following the Buddhist path, not for our own benefit alone, but also to benefit others. This is also demonstrated very much in this letter by talking about that the faith is non-retrogression and you will be assured birth with the awakening thought of others in their company. This, when it is meant by the talk of not waiting for America, gosh, I'm tired tonight. This then is what is meant by talking of not waiting for Amida to come to meet us at the moment of death and of completing the cause of birth and death in the ordinary life. Now, you've heard me talk before about that in some schools of Pure Land Buddhism, that the idea is that when you're on your deathbed, you're waiting for Amida-sama to come to you. And all of that beautiful Buddhist art where you see the Amida Buddha coming down on clouds and surrounded by bodhisattvas, what they're doing is they're coming to take the person to the Pure Land with them. And the idea is that Shinran said specifically that there is no of this after death right, that the idea is that when we pass, we do not have to wait for Amida Buddha because we are one with Amida Buddha already. So that Buddha nature is already there. So it's a complicated step that we don't need to conceptualize that Amida Buddha is coming to save us. Hopefully, if we do get to go to the Smithsonian, Michael, for the EVL, we will see some of these beautiful pieces of art where the Amida Buddha is descending. They're absolutely incredible. So again, focusing on not waiting for that is already assured. So then in a hymn or a wasan, Shinran says, those who aspire to be born in Amida's fulfilled land through outwards conditions may vary, should truly accept the name as promised in the primal vow, whether sleeping, walking, and never forget it. So here it talks about that the outward conditions could vary. Person's personality, what type of work they do, what situation they are in life. But what it does is that is reassured that the name is promised in the primal vow and refers to us to not to forget it, whether we're sleeping, walking. Outward conditions may vary, meaning that there is no distinction what is made between a lay person, priest, or between male and female. Here again, we go breaking down these contrasts, which are pretty dramatic. So as we know in Shin Buddhism, we talk about being ondogyo, fellow travelers. So I and Eric both are ordained, which means that we have a little more training, but we are not special or above any of the other members of the Sangha. And he reiterates this, that you do not need to be ordained to reach the Pure Land, nor does it matter if you're male or female. Next, we should truly accept the name as promised in the primal vow, and whether sleeping or walking, never forget it. That means no matter what the external form of our lives may be, even if our karma includes the 10 transgressions and the 5 grave offenses, or if we are those who slander the Dharma or lack the seeds of Buddhahood, if we undergo a turning of the mind and repent, and with deeply within truly realize that the Amida Tathagata's saving primal vow is for such wretched people as us, if we entrust without any doubt to the Tathagata, whether sleeping or waking, we are always mindful of Amida. Then we are said to be people of faith who rely on the primal vow and have attained the decisive mind. So decisive mind is not Shinjin, that's Anjin. And one of the interesting points is that this form of Shin Buddhism was practiced up until what I should say was emphasized until the Meiji era, the modernization of Japan opening up to the West in the 1860s and thereafter. That was when, through Western type scholarship, they said, well, why are we following Renyo Shonin, who's interpreting Shinran, when we actually have the words of Shinran? So some of those you might wonder why, like you look at hundreds of years of art and expression of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, it's Renyo, 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 Renyo. And all of a sudden in the modern era, the focus reverts back to Shinran Shonin. So when you look at that and when you do read this, there are different nuances between Shinjin and Anjin. What is the diamond-like mind and what is the entrusting mind? And this is where people will say that Renyo was trying to reach more to the everyday person by talking about entrusting in the trusting mind without forgetting sleeping or waking. It says, then beyond even if this, if we say the name constantly, walking, standing, sitting, and lying down, I like the lying down, we should think of it as an expression of gratitude for Amida Tathagata's benevolence, such as a person is called a practicer who has realized true and real faith and whose birth is decisively settled. Respectfully, 1174, July 18th. So I hope that reading that letter, and again, okay, so the next letter is going on hunting and fishing, which is forbidden in the precepts. You're not supposed to hunt, you're not supposed to eat meat. So here he goes and he deconstructs that idea that, and this is the famous one where he says, if you need to be a hunter to say the Nembutsu, be a hunter. If you need to be a fisherman to say the Nembutsu, be a fisherman. Very interesting contrast to what other schools of Buddhism were teaching at that time, or even contemporary other schools of Buddhism. So today, I hope that you'll get a taste of this. This book, I think, is unfortunately getting a little harder to find. I don't even know if it's in print anymore. I don't think so. And I know that, but this should be available at the library, and also I believe they still might have it in stock at the BCA bookstore. So if you want to check that out. So if you could please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Okay, Michael, you want to turn it off?
were we going to do the hour pledge, the and final
Yes.
meditation?
Yes, I'm sorry, you're right. Yes. So if we could do our pledge, please. Please join me in Gasho. Breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Not putting myself first, I will share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Realizing the gift of life I have received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Okay. If everybody could please join me in a short silent meditation, please.
Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Datsu.